Good evening, everyone. This is Mayor Bob. It's 5:30. We're going to convene our special meeting, July 7th, 2022. And I will ask Bessie Jo Wagner to conduct the roll call, please.
Mayor Giles,
Here.
Councilmember Nelson,
Present.
Councilmember Nielsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Machezek,
Yes, present.
Councilmember Thrower is absent.
Thank you, Bessie Jo. All right, well, we're going to start in with some quick items on our business agenda. We have 4 different departments that have a governmental equipment lease purchase agreement. Streets Department, Water Department, and then Airport. And I see Emily on board. She'll lead us through that. That's the 3rd item. And then is Eric McCormick on the line? If not, we'll take care of that as the 4th item. So Nathan, would you lead us through the request to adopt the resolutions?
Happy to. Nathan Stewart, Public Works Director. Good evening, City Council. So this is the first of 4 agenda bills discussing 5-year leases with Caterpillar equipment. For some of the older council members that have been on the council for a while, we've done this routinely over the past decade. We purchase equipment, we lease equipment through Western States and Caterpillar, but it's not very easy because they do not do leases. They do lease to own. And so you have to enter into an agreement, and then when that lease period ends, you have to buy the piece of equipment. But we've worked with this industry in Western States, which is the Treasure Valley, our region's representative for Caterpillar, so that Western States will pony up to buy the piece of equipment on behalf of the city. So then we get into a leased situation where we don't have to bring hundreds of thousands of dollars on year 5 to the table. So that's the process that we've done. We have 3 different timeframes for these leases. This is the largest timeframe, which is expiring in 2022. So that's why you have these 4 different departments and much more equipment being leased between 23 and 27. You'll also see this next year. We'll have maybe 1 or 2 pieces of equipment because they were added on in different 5-year increments. So the first agenda bill tonight is for the Streets Department. We are simply replacing the existing equipment that will be, those leases will terminate this year, and Western States will buy them for us. It is one M50 loader. That's our largest loader. Will be coming with a new Snowgate attachment and a wing. The other loader, the M950 loader, we have some existing equipment that we don't need. We were able to bring the cost down on these items. Then one M938 loader. It's a slightly smaller loader. We have a Snowgate for that one as well. And then a skid steer and a motor grader. So all of these costs have gone up significantly due to just interest rates as well as the cost of equipment. We've budgeted for that in fiscal 23 through the budgeting process. So there shouldn't be any concerns there, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions for Nathan Stewart on the streets proposal, resolution 22-20?
Sorry, Mike.
Oh, no problem. I don't have any questions.
Okay, I would just imagine part of the reason for this is you don't have to have all the mechanic maintenance equipment into 5 years, and the cost savings kind of gets doubled at the tail end of it.
Yeah, there's a couple things that go into this. One, these pieces of equipment are relatively sophisticated. They have a lot of very high-tech electronic equipment, emissions controls. Caterpillar and our city mechanic work very closely. So part of these lease requirements require that our mechanic do routine maintenance. And so we have a number of things that we must comply with. And if we fail to, then we violate the lease. And that's why we get the best lease that we can. Caterpillar has a number of diagnostics that they have to work with. We share parts. They ship us up the parts that we need. So it's a very efficient process to work directly with them. But yeah, at the end of the day, these are pieces of equipment that cannot break, and we can't fund to buy a new machine if something really goes bad outside of the warranty period. We do purchase equipment for pieces of equipment that we feel can live out a longer lifespan without a high risk of not being able to provide the services. But this has worked really well. We've seen great success. The amount of downtime of these pieces of equipment is a lot less than if we had older equipment that breaks down. And in the middle of a snow event, things break anyway. So it's really a priority that we have highly functioning newer equipment to keep our roads open.
All right, I'll look for a motion to adopt this resolution.
I move we adopt resolution 22-20, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for FY 23-27 Streets Department equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you both. A motion has been made and seconded to adopt resolution 22-20, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for FY 23 through 27 Streets Department equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Nielsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Giles,
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik,
Yes.
Thank you, council. That motion carries. We'll move on to the water department. Same lease.
Yes, correct. All of the same formatting, all of the same documents. This is for a water department backhoe. It's the only piece of equipment that the water department leases, and it is the only piece of equipment they use to maintain all of our facilities for snow removal. So that lease has to expire this year in 2022. So we're renewing with a very similar piece of equipment. Happy to answer any questions.
None for me.
I think we're good. I'll look for a motion to adopt this resolution 22-21.
Move to adopt resolution 22-21, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for FY 23-27, the water department equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded to adopt resolution 22-21, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for fiscal year 23 through 27, the water department equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote on that motion?
Councilmember Nielsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Giles,
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik,
Yes.
All right, council, that motion carries. We'll move on to the airport, which is a similar lease for some equipment. And Emily, would you lead us through that?
Yes, of course, Mayor. Good evening, council members, Mayor Giles. Emily Hart, McCall Airport Manager. Thank you, Nathan, for going into all those details prior to my turn. The airport is delighted to kind of tag-tail on this leasing program. Jerry Bison and I both feel like this is an excellent deal for us. You might remember a couple of years ago, our 1991 roll bus snow blower was unusable for about 10 to 14 days. That was not an AIP funded piece of SRE. So we're going to keep it until we make sure that our experiment works, which is to use our ITD aeronautics grant for $300,000 to procure a loader mounted snow blower. I think you all recall that. You signed that recently. So this will allow us to use two loaders at once. and eliminate down the road the Rollba snow blower, which is very old. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Oh, we're also leasing a fancy new blade that will allow us a little more surgical precision around the hangars and allow us to clear the taxi lanes and taxiways much more quickly due to its design. We will have a brand new taxiway D as of this fall that will need to be cleared, as well as up to 2 taxi lanes to access infield hangars in the next several years. So we look forward to the increased efficiency of this configuration. Any questions?
I think we're good, Emily. Thanks. Look for a motion to adopt resolution 22-22.
Move to adopt resolution 22-22, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and non-appropriation addendums for FY 23-27 airport equipment with Western States Caterpillar, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you both. A motion has been made and seconded to adopt resolution 22-22, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for FY 23 through 27 airport equipment with Western States Caterpillar, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Nielsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Giles,
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik,
Yes.
Thank you, council. That motion carries. Eric, you're up, and we're going to be talking about the equipment lease resolution 22-23 for the golf course.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Eric McCormick, Golf Course Director, and I'd like to thank Nathan and his staff for doing all the legwork on this. This lease actually replaces an existing lease for a machine we've had for 5 years, and it's pretty straightforward. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Doesn't sound like we have any questions. It's a tracked skid steer. Is that correct?
That is correct. We use it for snow removal in the wintertime and then construction projects in the summertime.
Thanks, Eric. I'll look for a motion to adopt this resolution.
Move we adopt resolution 22-23, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and non-appropriation addendums for FY 23 through 27 golf equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded to adopt resolution 22-23, authorizing the mayor to enter into, on behalf of the city of McCall, governmental equipment lease purchase agreements and a non-appropriation addendums for FY 23 through 27 golf equipment with Western States, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Nielsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Giles,
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik,
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. Nathan, thanks for your help in guiding that and providing leadership in all those 4 areas. We're going to move into our work session. And I'm going to turn this over to Nathan to introduce folks that are here to talk to us about the 2023 water rate study presentation. And it is an action item, so we will be providing direction to staff.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Giles. So it's my pleasure tonight to present to you our updated rate model study. We have a great group with us tonight. We have Bowen Collins represented by Greg Loescher. He's right here next to me on my left. We also have Keith Larson, who's online, and also Louisa Winslow. So it's been a real pleasure to get back together with these guys. If for some of you that were involved in 2018, Bowen Collins came in and did the first rate model analysis for the water department in over 2 decades. So it'd been since 1997 that rates were adjusted. And so it was a really good experience to establish what the department needed, how we could create a funding model. And that work that we put into back then was really useful today. We didn't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. So it was a very efficient process. Keith and Greg have been doing this for a long time, and it was a pleasure to work with Louisa as well over the last few days to really fine tune the information that we present tonight. We literally were updating the information this morning as we got updated information from the finance department as the result of your budget process. So I think we're in good shape. We also have online Eric Landsberg from Clear Solutions. He'll be here to answer some questions about these significant capital improvements that are driving some of the decisions that need to be made. So as questions come up about that, you can ask Eric. And this is really an opportunity for us to introduce kind of the state of the state with our water department and the facilities. So this, although we're here to talk about rates, there will be some questions about why are we doing these things? And as we get back with the council over the next few months and finalize these decisions, we'll have subsequent opportunities to provide you more information. So with that, I'll pass it over to Greg and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Nathan. So Greg Loescher with Bowen Collins and Associates. Let's see here. I can share my screen here so that everybody online can see this as well.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. So as Nathan said, in 2018, we worked with the city to do a rate study and come up with recommendations for a new rate structure and new rates for your water system. So our objective in revisiting the rate study is to look at how things have performed over the last few years and to see what adjustments might be needed going forward. And for the benefit of everybody, including those that weren't in on the previous study, I've got some slides up front here to go over some of the basic history of water rates in the city and give some background. Our overall objective is to establish a rate structure that gives you a sustainable revenue to fund your water system, to operate, maintain it, and keep it up in a fair and equitable manner. So, first of all, Nathan referred to this, historical water rates in the city. The blue, let's see, the x-axis here on the bottom is years starting in 1997, coming up to present. The vertical axis is water rates in terms of a typical residential monthly water bill for a typical user. The blue solid line is your actual rates historically. The white line is what the rates might have looked like if you would have just adjusted for inflation starting in 2006. So from 1997 to 2006, rates dropped a number of times as I understand it, as bonds were retired and for other reasons. And then from 2006 to 2018, they stayed constant, no changes. Following the study in 2018, we undertook a stepped approach to catch back up, basically, over a period of 3 years. And I'll show you that briefly. And you can see on here, the idea behind that was to catch back up with inflation and get us back roughly in the ballpark of the dotted white line. So the results of the 2018 water rate study and what was adopted by council are shown here. Water rates were increased using a phased approach over a 3-year period at a level of roughly 15 to 20% per year for an average bill for 3 years, with a 2.5 8% increase thereafter to keep up with inflation. Also adopted a block rate structure. So rather than a single rate for all users, it's a tiered system. So for the first block one is the first 5,000 gallons of use. Every person who has a connection pays the same amount per 1,000 gallons for the first 5,000 gallons. Then they move into tier two. And for the next 15,000 gallons beyond that, from 5,000 to 20,000, you pay an increased rate per 1,000 gallons. And then beyond that, above 20,000 gallons of use, you move into a third tier for the high-end water users. Works similar to a progressive tax system that you pay more progressively as you get into the higher tiers. And also shown on this table near the bottom there, on the second to last row, is a typical residential bill and how those might have been affected by rates, the rates that were adopted. Also in 2018, we looked at your capitalization charges. So capitalization charge addresses those new users that need to buy into your system. And there's only one acceptable method to adopt a capitalization charge in Idaho. It's called the Loomis formula. Basically, we value your system, the replacement cost of your system, all the infrastructure you own, account for depreciation, and then divide that by the number of ERUs or equivalent residential units, which you could think of as a single family home, maybe equivalent. You divide by that number and you come up with what it would cost to buy essentially a share of your system. And that's what a new user would pay to buy into what's already been built. At that time, based on that recommendation, the old capitalization charge of $3,750 was increased to $5,705, and that has remained constant since 2018.
Do you want to take our questions towards the end, or should we, as something comes up?
Certainly as we go, you can.
Okay, and this isn't a question yet, but it'll come up maybe at some point. So when we look at the capitalization fee and we think of our housing action plan, where we're trying to encourage such things as even maybe tiny homes. And I'm trying to think how we, just where the incentive the city has, how it fits in, that we could create an incentive for the smaller homes to have a lesser fee. Like, you know, the homes that are under 800 square feet or something, might we have a capitalization of 2,500? But that might come in somewhere separate in our housing action instead of being in our water rates plan. But I just.
So this is a one-time buy-in, and I suppose the city could pass an ordinance that for tiny homes, using your example, that the city could pay into that, right? Or there's some way of doing that to make sure the revenue goes in. But it is a one-time cost. And it's really important, as you'll see in later slides, it's really important to collect that capitalization every hookup. Right?
Yes.
If we don't, we get behind.
Correct. You need to account for the costs of maintaining and keeping up and improving your system every time somebody else adds on. One clarification in terms of your current rate structure, you do have what's called a small user capitalization buy-in fee. That's about $1,500 less than the $5,705. And it's defined as small users, businesses with a number of fixture units less than 10, which is truly a small user.
And then our currently adopted incentive program separate from the water fund where they can qualify for the $10,000 and all that. Again, I don't know if you're talking about small homes without deed restrictions and all that, but we did talk about that concept of offsetting infrastructure costs to encourage local housing. And so that's what that 10,000 is currently intended for. So the developer can use it towards whatever, including infrastructure. And so another place to revisit that is whether you want to change that dollar amount. But But we do want to make sure that the water fund is kept whole so that we can replace and upgrade as we.
Yeah, great. That answers my, well, and I think, just so we keep in our mind that part of our housing action plan needs incentives to move in the direction we want to go, and we just got to think where they could come from.
We have a couple ways to look at this. One is that the water department we can't be biased towards a certain user, meaning we have to treat everybody the same, no matter who they are. But at the same time, if you have a larger home, you'll likely need a larger meter. And so the 3/4 inch meter, which is for pretty much a modest home, which in comparison to some of the ones we see today is small. But we see a lot of applications, a lot of building permits today. Houses are requiring 1-inch meters, 1.5-inch meter. We have a house in Whitetail that needs a 2-inch meter. And those, they're paying 2 to 4 to 6 times that capitalization fee. So you definitely do have that economy of scale. A larger home will pay more capitalization fees, a smaller home.
I also just thought in the increased rate use per usage, that we want to be favoring ecological use of our resources. And that somebody has a 2-inch and, an 1.5 acres of yard we'd like to discourage that, thinking of the drier climates and our environmental footprint. So I thought the escalation of price per use was modest. I mean, you know a lot better than I do. I mean, I thought it was fair, and I also thought it was modest. And I'd like to, my own preference of where to stand on this is the stance is to encourage conservation of resources. And it may not be, we're at the top of the water chain. So it's not, we're the first user, so it's not so critical in a way of us now. It might be in 10 years. But at some point in time, the downstream primary water users may look at us and go, when does the time come that we really perhaps reach the point where some farmer in Payette goes, wait a minute, I'm the primary water user and you're watering yards. And I'm on conservation down here. Anyhow, I think all that kind of is, I think we as a town have a philosophy that conservation is something we believe in and is important to us, and that our policies and fees reflect it. But they seem to. I just want to cover that in addition. Thank you.
Yes, and 2 things to speak to that. We'll look at some more specifics of your block structure here and how it's performing. But part of the design of that is specifically there is significantly more impact on the system cost-wise for the high-end users at the top end versus just the average user. So the tiered structure, the block rate structure is designed in part to address that. And we'll talk about how that's performing. And as Nathan mentioned, it is substantially more for those who choose bigger meters. So it's 2, 4, and 6 times, and sometimes even more than that. This $5,705 cost for those with larger meters.
Thanks. I'll let you get back on your.
And we'll have chances to look at that again. Oh, and the other thing I was going to clarify is it actually is very critical for you, even though you're at the top end. You're already seeing the effects in terms of your capital improvements that you're needing sooner because of water use, peak water use, especially last year and the year before. So even though you're at the top of the food chain, it still matters a lot to you immediately. In terms of conservation. So to summarize what was adopted in 2018, a 3-year phased increase in the water rates with 2.5% annual inflation thereafter, a block rate structure with 3 tiers, a capitalization charge increase, as we just discussed, and some other minor recommendations that we don't need to go over here. But that is generally what was adopted. So our objective, as I said, in this update is to see how well we did, compare the estimates from 2018 for how we performed over the last 4 years. And then second, to see if there's any adjustments needed going forward. So how did we do? So the purpose of this graph is to show us the expense projections we made in 2018 compared to your actual expenses and your updated prognostications going forward. So by way of explanation, years are across the bottom. Expenses in dollars are up the left-hand side. The bars in the chart are overall expenditures, including operation and maintenance, service on debt, water line and hydrant replacements, and other scheduled capital improvements. The bottom one is the O&M, the blue bars are the O&M. Let's see if this one's really slow. These ones on the bottom are O&M, and you can kind of look at that as the bare minimum. The dotted black line is what we projected your O&M expenditures would be in 2018 going forward. So one thing you can see from this is that your O&M costs as of now projecting forward are going to be higher. That's just current inflation and updates on your O&M costs. But those are going to be higher than what we projected. Second, the big purple bars at the top, those are your capital improvements. You have some significant ones coming up in the next 4 years, including improvements to the treatment plant, filters, including water main replacements, and a storage tank. You can see from the black line, which was our estimates in 2018, some of those have shifted forward based on your current needs. There's a need for some of those sooner. And the treatment plant replacement or significant rehabilitation that's out in the 2035 to 2040 range has actually moved back in capital improvement. So whereas we thought it was about the 2035 to 37 range in 2018, Clear Solutions and Eric have indicated that that could probably slide back to the 2039 to 42 range. Overall, this looks pretty good. We could not necessarily have predicted current inflation, and your capital improvements never line up exactly with how we guessed. But this is what we guessed and how your expenses are tracking right now.
I have one more question, and it probably goes to Nathan, but when you try to project out and think of O&M across the years and your growth rate accelerates beyond what you could have projected in 2018, which is our case, you think of so it's like our O&M, but our O&M may not actually be that much higher per unit that we're serving. It's just, it's the same with the streets, the budget has to. So anyhow, to me, I think that line goes partially reflects growth on top of inflation. I just mean these stuff. People don't, are seeing our same charts. You kind of think about, why does it cost so much more? It's not salaries. We're maintaining a bigger system.
Correct.
I mean, it's salaries, but it's not. Yeah, to do more. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. So what drives rising costs? There's three major things. System improvements as you replace, rehabilitate, and expand your system. Operations and maintenance, just the rising costs every year of salaries, equipment, and other operations and maintenance, and then rising inflation. So just to address system improvements briefly, this is a short summary of upcoming in the next 5 to 6 years capital improvements that have been budgeted for or planned for. And this information comes with Nathan working together with Eric Landsberg with Clear Solutions to come up with a plan for hydrant annual replacement, water line annual replacement, And then the other improvements you can see here, including those that I mentioned previously, a 2 million gallon storage tank is coming in the next few years, as well as water treatment plant upgrades. And you can see how those all add up to some, in 2022, you only have maybe $1 million in capital improvements versus in 23, 24, and 26, you have 4 to 5 million with it. 3 million in 2025. So you have kind of a significant 4-year hump of capital improvements to get through, and we're going to be revisiting that in a little bit here. This is just to give you an overall idea of inflation. Most people already know this, but inflation historically, since the mid-90s, has been quite predictable. It's almost exactly a 3% line along that whole time period. You can see in orange the little blips. Those are times when monthly or a few months of inflation, or maybe even 6 months, trended higher. But generally, it's kept to that 3% pace for a long time until sometime early to mid last year. And you can see on the right-hand side, things have really taken an upturn. That long-term average inflation of 3% in the last year and a half has kind of skyrocketed up into an average of about 8%. Now, we've discussed this, and Nathan has pointed out, on a lot of public works projects, we see significantly more than that. This is a national average construction cost index, so it includes construction materials and labor for general industry. Not specifically, say, water projects. So we have seen, and I'm sure you have seen, an increase in bid prices in the sometimes 30 to 50% range in the last year, which has been difficult to keep up with.
And Greg, to kind of clarify that, Idaho is experiencing a unique stress, lack of labor, lack of resources, lack of companies available to meet the construction demand. And so even though the national average says 8%, what they're seeing in the Treasure Valley, what folks are seeing in eastern Idaho, northern Idaho, and then you add in the Valley County factor, which we're not in a large metropolitan area with a lot of resources and a lot of contractors, it's really hitting us. And you've heard me explain that as various bid projects have come through and the costs are just really high. So what we're seeing as inflation is could be much, much higher than 8%.
The point of that graph is mainly that it's been an unusually protracted period of inflation that we're going through right now. So looking at how we guesstimated in 2018 and how things have performed with the new rates, the black line is what we would have estimated as your revenue for 2018 to 2022 based on the new rates. As you can see from 2018 going back, your income stream was flat. It didn't go up at all. The blue line is what you actually collected. And the main explanation for this is a higher growth rate. So for something like master planning of a water system, we're always more conservative on the high side for growth rates. So you make sure you're keeping up. On the water rate side, more conservative means to assume lower growth and lower income. And then if you get more, that's great. It's always better to take in more than we guessed than less. We don't want these two lines flipped. So this is good news all around. It mostly means you had more new users come into the system than what we estimated conservatively in 2018. And that's good. So it contributes to ongoing higher revenue stream. Some of this is also attributable to, I would say, slightly higher than anticipated water use, selling more water. But most of that trend comes from higher growth. So how did the block rates do? As I said, there's blue is the block 1. That's from 0 to 5,000 gallons. Pink is the block 2. And green is the block 3. The center circle is how we set up the rates in terms of water use per block, what we anticipated you would use per block. 39% for tier 1, 35% for tier 2, and 26% for tier 3. The outer circle is how it's performed over the last 4 years. Tier 1 has used slightly less, almost exactly 38%. And tier 3 has used more. Tier 2 is slightly less.
But those are really close to your estimate. I would say we wouldn't expect you to be closer than that. That's really pretty good.
Yeah, sometimes it's better be lucky than good, right?
Maybe.
Who knows why?
I think you're doing pretty good on those estimates.
The good news associated with this slide is when most of the overage is in the upper tier, that means you just took in more revenue in the upper tier overall.
And Keith, you came up with those estimates from reviewing the usage from our customers back in 2018, looking at historic use. Was that right?
Yeah, that's we did an analysis of your monthly sales, and that's what we predicted based on what we saw. So that means by implementing the tiers, the water use patterns haven't changed that much.
Right, which was one of our questions was, if we charge more for high users, will they start using less water? And I don't think this data suggests that that has been very effective. And we talked about that internally, and that could likely be because these higher users have significant incomes that can afford their water bill, and they would much rather irrigate than save money. Now, certain users may have changed, and it may have certain individuals may have cut back, but some of these larger water users are kind of erasing those conservation attempts by some customers.
Is this residential usage or is this all water usage?
All.
So I guess on that block 3, I mean, how much of that do you think is attributed to commercial usage?
I don't know.
It seems like there's a higher likelihood that, restaurants or hotels and stuff like that be in that block 3 category.
Yeah, larger. So if like a hotel or a restaurant may have a larger meter. So if you have, say, a 1-inch meter, you get twice the volume in block 1. If you have an 1.5-inch meter, you get 4 times the volume in block 1. So you get up to 5,000 gallons in block 1 for a 3/4-inch meter. But a hotel will have a much larger meter. They may have multiple meters, and so they would get 10,000 or 20,000 or 40,000 gallons to use and be charged in that block rate. So their meter size is really important. If you have a commercial business that's using a 3/4-inch meter, but using high water, then they may be paying more because they're into those block 2s and block 3s. And that's why getting the size of the meter is really important. And a lot of times those meters were installed 25 years ago. But they do have the opportunity to come in and talk with us if they want to change their meter out and get a larger meter. But you're right. The larger commercial user may be paying more in this third block.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an interesting point of education for business owners, I think, to make sure, we're trying to support them. I guess I was just trying to figure out the numbers are super close, but that block 3 number being higher, it's interesting to figure out if that's just, more people watering more grass or what. I guess it's kind of hard to determine.
Yeah, and we can actually look at that pretty easily. If you look at, and I have some graphs in another presentation we can look at the end if we want, in terms of how we came up with the block rates. The 5,000 was set based on the typical winter use of an average water user. And then that average water user, tier 2, block 2 was intended to cover most of them for their summer use. And then tier 3 is for those very high summer use users. A lot of times the pattern for a commercial user is a little different in that day to day, they're going to use a lot more, but it's more steady throughout the year because they'll have a lot less landscaping versus a commercial, versus a very large home might have small winter use and tremendous summer use because they're watering outside. I mean, outdoor water use kind of dwarfs indoor in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So we can certainly look at which commercial users might fall into tier block 2 and block 3.
Yeah, I think it'd just be kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I remember having the discussion about, was this gonna help promote conservation? And I think having the tiered fee structure increase also helped too, where, your average person is not, the impact is not quite as large as having that all happen at one time.
So we also have Sabrina Sims, our water systems manager. She's raised her hand to add a comment to this discussion. Sabrina, feel free to unmute and share your thoughts.
So I've been keeping tabs on the high consumption list for a while. Bobette has been sending it to me both winter and summer months. It is surprising the amount of single family homes that is high consumption in the summer months that are in above the 100,000 gallon mark through a 5/8 3/4 meter. Some of it into the over 150,000 gallons a month mark. Just last month, we had some over 168 to 200,000 gallons. So keep that in mind that there are a lot of just single family resident homes, not just commercial, that are in that rate. I just want to make that clear. So
That's really helpful to know. And yeah, that's really helpful. And I know when this first came on board, we were really interested in the notion of water conservation. And how do you encourage that financially and still be legal and following appropriate rate structure models?
Yeah, and I've been talking to Meredith about this, and she's been working on some schemes and some ways to get it out there about promoting some xeriscape and some ways to put it out there in people's minds on getting it to where they can put xeriscape and more natural landscaping to where we don't have this extreme watering, because it really does. We went from 700,000 gallons at the beginning of June, maybe 800,000 gallons at the beginning of June, but now we're at like 2.5 million gallons. So it's really an extreme difference in water usage. And when you're going from people using hardly any water to a lot of, and hotels, yeah, you're going to expect usage because tourist season bumping up, but from a regular home going to 168,000 gallons, that's a lot of usage for a single family residence.
So
and when you're getting a lot of them, I just want that to stay in people's minds that these are single family residents.
So it's definitely on our mind, and I think the entire council is interested in being able to evaluate tools for adjusting the rate in that block 3 so that financially there's some incentives to conserve.
Awesome.
Sabrina, do we know if some of those are larger short-term rentals that have that high volume, so it's not necessarily outside use that could be, but like Frank says, it's pretty hard to get indoor use to But maybe some of these places have 19 or 20 people most of the time.
You know, that's something I want to do. I really just started to collect data, and that's like my next source of data I want to start to collect. Is really tracking down the single or the secondary and vacation rentals. But collecting all this data has been collecting lost water data. It's collecting data that we haven't been collecting. And it's kind of been a slippery slope of collecting data, and we're getting there. So this is the next step.
Great. I think it's really helpful. And is it practical to think that at some point in the future, we could reach where other water rights users are looking at us and saying, hey, wait a minute, on your, you're gonna have to find some way through your ordinances and that to regulate water usage or to reduce it, because is that
Certainly. So we have what is considered junior water rights here at the city. They're from 1927, I believe, but so yeah, the city pays when we use more water than we're allowed to, and our water rights that we do have usually expire in late June. So from July on through the irrigation season, we're buying unused water rights from other prime water right users that aren't using that water. The cost is quite low, surprisingly. And so at some point in the future, that may become a major driving factor in our costs. Right now, it's insignificant. So that's why we do water master plans routinely every 5 to 10 years. We go back and look at those water rights. We meet with the water master for this area and understand what's happening there. So I do think that issue will come to light in the future, but today in our current projection, that's actually not a financial issue at this time. But what I can tell you is it's very obvious that the irrigation use is driving the size of our system. It's driving the requirements of our fire storage protection devices, whether it's storage tanks or, a variety of different devices, chlorination protocols, all of those different things. Because as Sabrina said, we go from 500 to 700,000, and then boom, as soon as the sun comes out and the temperatures heat up, and all of our 75% of our residents come back and have their irrigation systems turned back on, it bumps up. And that's the nature of our clientele. So we do have to build a system to serve them. At the same time, we have to incentivize those that want to save money. So if you're using a 3/4 inch meter and you're buying 180,000 gallons of water per month, you've got a very, very large water bill. So they are paying for that water at that tier 3 rate.
But I guess our question is going to be, before we leave tonight, we're hoping we'll get some guidance on, do we legally have an option? And let's look at page 14 of our handout, the next one. For block 3, for example, in 2023, it'll be about $2.50. $2.56 is the exact figure. Do we have the authority legally with the proper studies and our goals of water conservation to bump that to $5?
Okay. So when we get to that
Or $8 or $10. I'm hoping you'll answer that. Can we even dabble with that, or is there Idaho law that?
the team for that question.
Cool. All right.
you're gonna get it for every one of us, yeah.
Yes. So, and yes, we'll speak specifically to that. The two last comments I'll make on this slide. Number one, this is water usage, these percentages, not revenue. So the majority of your revenue still comes from tier 3, like 36 to 40% of it. And the minority of your resident revenue, like 30%, comes from tier 1. So most of the money still comes from tier 3, which is as designed.
Greg,
Yes.
I think it's important to clarify when you say most of the money, you're talking about volumetric sales money. Most of the money actually comes from base rates, not from volumetric sales. So that's the one other thing that we can talk about at the end is, do we shift some of our revenue from those base rates into volumetric sales? So just clarification.
Yeah, so just as a precursor, the two things that we would discuss, if you want to try to target the high end more, are a fourth tier or shifting the base rate lower and having it be lower and more charge per volume. Less from the base rate, and which is constant, and more volume. We can talk about both of those things.
And the volume rates we talked about from Sabrina, are these like in the, these are per, are we always talking per day, per month, or what? Has there been any?
Per month.
Always per month? Okay.
Well, yes, per month. When she was talking about the treatment plant going from 700,000 to 2.5 million, that's gallons per day.
Per day. Okay.
But the individual user using 150,000 gallons per month.
Okay.
And remember, I think it's important for us to remember, because you folks briefed us about 20 minutes ago on this. These big capital improvements are being driven by massive amounts of demand for water. Massive amounts. And if, for example, somehow society shifted to not increasing their water irrigation in the summer, went to dry landscaping and other things, it's possible some of those things could be delayed, those big capital improvement projects, or the scale of them might be less. So there is a connection between the costs. It's like, yeah, we're getting a lot more revenue. Let's bring it on. Just keep pumping out water and collecting more money. But is that really the right approach? So that's why we're asking these things. And it's really encouraging to know that you've already thought about all this and will guide us through it.
And Keith will speak to this more when we talk about different strategies as we make adjustments, but the tiered structure, it's not meant to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, even though it kind of looks like that. It has to be set up based on cost of service, so it's defensible. And we'll get back to your question on whether you can just make it $50 for the top one. The answer is no, not if you want it to be hold up in court. But there are approaches and strategies we can use to. So if we look at this graph, this is the previous graph with some more information added. So again, the bars are your expenditures up to date and then projected going forward. The black line is what you would have for revenues going forward if we didn't make any further adjustments in water rates, meaning if you held today's rate constant. And the only reason it trends up slightly is growth, some capitalization fees each year. The orange line, Nate has mentioned our water rate model. We have a model that we plug all this into, and we come up with a defensible and reliable revenue stream that we would recommend. The orange line is that. That's what your system should be funded at long-term in order to not fall behind and also to be fair. The dotted black line would be our recommended adjustments in order to meet that. And I'll talk about those specifically now. But anyway, so the orange line is what we would recommend going forward.
So that dotted line's yeah. In other words, we need to make some slight adjustments to the rates in order to stay on the correct line. So we're not going slowly broke.
Correct.
We can do all the capital improvement projects that are needed. We can do all the O&M and all the other things that you talked about.
Yeah, with a couple of asterisks, you don't have enough money in the bank strictly on rates to do all capital improvements. So we will have to look at cash flow long term. But this is a steady, reliable increase in rates to maintain reliable funding.
So on the graph on page 7, it didn't have the income line on there, the projected income from 2018 and actual. I guess I'm a little bit confused or trying to remember what projecting, because I remember showing long-term that projected income, continuing to go up. It wasn't like we're just going the next 5 years and then
Yeah.
stay the same.
Yeah, so one clarification here. You adopted rates up through essentially October of this year in 2018. So what we show as the black line is assuming you do nothing. Now, in our last, in 2018, what we recommended is that every year going forward, you include at least 2.5% inflation. If you did that, that black line would trend up a little. So the black line is just showing if for some reason you decide to do nothing at all, that's where it would ride. If you rode just at the 2.5% inflation, it bumps up a little, or closer to the top of the orange line there, or the top of the bars there. And then the orange line is where we need to course correct a little bit so that long-term we keep up. But yes, that flat line is not assuming what we did in 2018. It's just assuming that as of today, all that's on the record you've adopted is up through end of this year. Make no changes moving forward.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our recommendations. First two things, slight adjustments. In the next year, as in October of this year for fiscal year 23, we would recommend instead of the 2.5% increase, a 5% increase in rates. Going forward beyond that, we would recommend instead of a 2.5% increase, a 3% annually. And those two recommendations are what would make the dotted black line match exactly the recommended level of funding from the water model, which is the orange line. Those are not major adjustments in my mind, but they're course corrections a little bit. That's what and then what you can see on this table, what everyone likes to look at right away is the second to last line, the typical residential bill and how it's affected by those rate increases. Your existing rates right now are about 60, would result in a typical bill about $65, $66 a month. That would go up next year to about $69 a month and similar increase going forward. And just to note, we recognize inflation may not revert to 3% next month. So that's built in and tapered down over the next year or two, 2023 and 24 at a 7 and 5% rate in order to trend back down to 3%. We don't think it's justifiable to project high inflation way beyond that, not based on history. We just have to deal with that down the road. But we have built in that we assume that's going to trend down over the next couple of years, but not immediately now. Okay, so how does that compare with other municipalities? There's some special things about McCall, and you already know these. One is you are a mountain community that has a lot of second homeowners. It's a resort community, so you have a huge influx in the summer that you deal with. Also, you're not on well water. You treat lake water, surface water, which is more expensive than well water. So we try to include some similar municipalities with similar characteristics. For example, Park City, Utah. These other two in Utah, Mountain Regional and Springdale, are in the same area as Park City. Whitefish, Montana. McCall, the current recommended or proposed typical rate, the current that you have right now, and then we've included some other local Idaho ones here for reference. Some of those, for example, Boise, you have to recognize that's almost all well water, not treated water. So, and it's a much, much larger system without the seasonal variation. And so their water per ERU is going to be cheaper to produce and cheaper to fund. The other thing to note is that Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for agencies, rather than to gradually increase to keep up, to go for a long period of time and then have to make huge adjustments. And this comparison depends a lot on when you catch somebody. If they just made adjustments, it's a good comparison. If they've kept it the same for the last 5 years, it's really not apples to apples.
And
So
that,
the Ketchum and Haley have the two asterisks. It says these are high population density spreads costs across more users. Because that kind of explains a little bit. I was wondering why they're so much lower than us, but they may use groundwater and have it has two asterisks on them, Haley and Ketchum.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out if we flip flop those.
yeah, I think we have a little
We did
asterisk error
flip-flop
there.
Yeah, so the two asterisks go on Boise and Garden City, and the single asterisk goes on Ketchum and Haley.
Thank you for that clarification.
That makes more sense, right?
Yep.
There has to be something wrong in here. So
Right.
If that's it, that's good.
The other thing
But
we,
the good news is we have an explanation because I was going, what the heck? Come on. You gotta,
the other thing I'd note, I pushed these guys hard yesterday, trying to get this information, trying to find a community that's similar to McCall is tough. There are a lot of well communities in Idaho, and so well water is a lot cheaper to produce. Sandpoint is a similar community, but they haven't changed their rate since 2017. So we may find out that they're doing this next week and they're going to bump their rate up. So we'll keep, abreast to this. We'll keep reaching out to folks. And, what I've always kind of referred to as our sister local cities are Sandpoint and Whitefish, and both of those communities are quite larger. You have to understand too, one of our driving factors in our capital costs is water main replacement. And so we have very low density. We have lots of spread out. We don't have a lot of customers in the downtown core area per se, compared to some of these other communities. So we have a number of factors that work against us providing low water rates.
Capitalization charge. So as I summarized before, we calculate a replacement value of your system, account for depreciation, and come up with a recommended total capitalization charge per ERU to buy into your system. As expected, that number has gone up, and it's gone up rather significantly to the tune of about 25%. You might sometimes think that would go up much more than that, but there are competing factors at play. Depreciation factors into that. So even though you may have more users, a bigger system, a more valuable system over time, all the elements of the system that haven't been replaced will depreciate, when it's now 4 years later than it was before. So those things kind of offset each other. Although on average, overall, it bumps up by about 25% in order to cover the fair cost of buying into your system. And that is a defensible number for Idaho statute.
And we think a defensible number. Would you cover some of the defenses again? Because we are the ones that have to have that kind of on the top of our head a bit. And you say 25%. And if somebody asked me outside, what drives a 25% increase? I didn't get a 25% pay rate. And some of the things we know, like the 30 or 40% increase in some of the products we use and the bid prices on the water capital projects that are coming up right away. And then the low density factor on the growth thing, we're trying to drive it inward, but it still has a spread out effect in our city. What else might I use as?
Lyle, I'll take a stab at this, and maybe Greg and Keith can help where I miss out. But the Loomis rule is very specific, and it's been challenged throughout the state in different areas by developers. Personally, I think philosophically, it should be the replacement cost of the system, not the current value of the system. If it was the replacement cost of the system, the cost to replace our system from 2018 to 2022 has gone up a lot more than this 15 to, is it 20%?
25%.
25, much more than 25%, because the cost to replace a piece of pipe in 2018 is much higher today than that. But because the Loomis rule says you can only take the current value of the system, our pipes are getting older, and so we have to depreciate all of those pipes. So it's the total cost of the system, the current value of that used car divided by the number of customers that it can support. It's a straight line calculation, and that's what you get.
Yeah, I got it. Now, I think the defense of it. And as you said, compared to other Idaho communities who use the same formula, we're in range of the 25% of the capitalization cost. It's going up all across Idaho using the same standard that Idaho towns are required to use. Is that?
Yeah, and so the two clarifications. One is I probably said defensible too many times, but I'm focused very much on making, we're focused very much on making sure it's defensible in court versus your question is also whether it's defensible with plain logic to someone who comes and asks you, which is also important. We want you to be able to defend it there as well. The other clarification is someone might calculate it and then politically someone might decide to choose something lower. Still, the Loomis formula just says that's how you calculate it and you can't go higher than that. I suppose you could choose something lower if you want to be very pro-development or something like that. What you can't justify is something higher. It won't hold up.
Yeah, but you're going to pay for it if you don't. Still.
Yeah, and our general recommendation is if we're going to go to all this trouble to figure your rates and your defensible capitalization charges, why not just adopt that exact number and you have all the math behind it, and it's fair and it's a proactive way to keep to upkeep your system and pay for it long term versus in fits and spurts. Anything else you would add on that, Keith?
No, I just say if you don't adopt the maximum, you're asking existing users to pay for development, which is not something I think most of us want to do.
You are correct.
Thanks.
Thank you for explaining that.
So on the projected income chart, there's another one in here too. Those capitalization fees, is that dashed line there, that's in conjunction with the rate increase and the capitalization fee increase?
Yes.
Equals that.
Yep. So we assume a modest amount of growth and there's capitalization charges associated with that. I did have this slide comparing you to other municipalities, very much the same lineup as with water rates in terms of where you fall for other resort communities and local communities.
And we were unable to get Whitefish because they charge an impact fee and there are a number of factors that play into that. So it may not even be apples to apples because they're charging for number of square feet of irrigation and other things like that.
Yeah, state to state, sometimes it's a little tough. It's the same intent, but the calculation is different depending on whether you're looking at replacement value of the system or impact fees. In other states would be looking forward at impacts on the system that have to be paid for by growth. Go ahead.
How much do the stricter EPA regulations impact these numbers? I mean, not like dollars and cents impact, but is it a substantial issue now that they're putting more and more regulations that we need to comply with? And how does that?
So Eric could speak to this as well, but my general take is what it does is it moves your capital improvements forward to where they have to be done sooner. For example, lead and copper problems move water line replacements and service replacements up in time rather than stretched out over time. And Eric could probably speak to treatment plant and storage tank requirements and how those are impacted by regulations.
I don't see Eric on the list.
Oh, is he not on? I
Yeah.
do know he has mentioned that both the treatment plant filter upgrades and the storage tank are required to keep up with regulations.
But
Required sooner, I should say.
so some of us that are just amateurs, we just heard about this a couple months ago. It's a big deal, this copper and lead replacement out of EPA, which DEQ will be administering and tracking us. So it's a very good question Annette asked. I'm hoping that the suggested rate increases will be able to help us do the inventory that they want and find out if we have problems. And then, the next step will be, there'll be deadlines for us to fix it. So I think we do need to forecast that a little bit, take some guesses on that.
I can speak to this a little
Go ahead.
bit. So the lead and copper rule has come out. It's been in draft form. But Idaho Rural Water Association, DEQ, EPA are all ramping up information about this. So part of our fiscal 23 budget includes about $12,000 to work with it's a for-profit company, but it's working with Idaho Rural Water Association so they can provide their services at a discount to the communities that they serve. But we have to develop a program by 2024 to address our lead and copper issues. Now, fortunately, in the city, we don't have a tremendous amount of lead jointed pipes. And a lot of those pipes have already been identified for replacement, independent of high levels of lead or copper in your drinking water. So our operational costs are going up. And as that program gets implemented, depending on how aggressive the regulations come out, we may need to advance those water main replacement projects. But I think because we've worked on the water master plan and we've adopted these rates and we continue to do these CIPs, we'll probably just be shifting priorities to say, oh, well, we wanted to upgrade this 4-inch ductile iron pipe over here to improve fire flow, but we have to address this lead jointed pipe over here. So I think it will increase our costs, but I don't think it's going to be overly significant because we're doing such proactive capital planning.
And Sabrina has her hand up.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Nathan said, is that we were going to work with 120 Water, which is a consultant that with working with Idaho Rural Water. We worked with moving up some projects that weren't identified in our water master plan that identified some of these lead jointed pipes to move forward with some of our streets projects, such as Davis Street project, to work with the lead and copper and get this moved out of the way before this was ever in the excuse me, sorry, I've got kind of a cold, brought about, and hopefully 120 Water in 23 will bring about a bunch more, and we'll be way in front of this. I've done a lot of lead and copper sampling that was not needed to identify other realms. And I think we are very well prepped to be well ahead going into the whole lead and copper. In fact, I was told, much like Linda, I'm kind of needy. I was told by DEQ I'm kind of needy as far as way over sampling, as far as doing way more than I need to do, so that we know what we need to do. And I think we're very geared for lead and copper, and we've identified those areas of town. Brian Parker was very good at getting us all the ages of all the houses in town, so we know what we need to do. So I'm very proud. I think we got a very good standing, and so that's all I gotta say about that.
So I think our main concern is that, and that's a very good question, is that that's been factored in. Because we don't want to come back 5 years from now and go, oh, we should have had a bigger rate increase. That's all.
Right.
If you folks are recommending to us, we have another increment to address that, and it's defensible in court, we're all ears. We'd like to be briefed on that.
Yeah, that rule is so, it's been so dynamic throughout the evolution. I think we're very much interested in complying with the rules, creating the program, observing how this shakes out. And there are responsibilities on the private homeowners too. And we, as a water utility, have to create a solution there, but we may not need to fund that solution. So a lot more to come on that. And as we work with DEQ on getting these programs up, we'll be able to come back to the council and explain that. But we're just starting to get into it, despite the fact that Sabrina's come on board and done a ton of data collection. So we're ready for any questions that they have.
Yeah, the first step of that is as an inventory of not only pipes, but services. And so. Yes, and so we've looked at this. This is your revenue and expenditures projected going forward, assuming you adopt a 5% rate increase in October for 2023, and then a 3% going forward, as well as the recommended capitalization charge. So obviously, if you look at this graph, you can see those big purple bars are larger than your revenues. So we also did, and then down the road, when you do the treatment plant expansion or replacement, there will be another big round of expenses that will exceed your revenues. So we did look at cash flow as well, which is important. And so what this is a cash flow projection going forward. Orange bars are projected income. Blue bars are total expenditures. Anytime you see the blue bar bigger than the orange, you're using cash to pay for that, cash on hand. Anytime it goes the other direction, you're putting money in the bank to save up for the future. So we used available cash, not cash in reserve, as a starting point, and we look at expenditures going forward, and the amount that you would need to potentially bond for short-term improvements might be in the range of 5.2 million. And the timing of that would come into play late 2023, or mid to late 2023, depending on timing of the projects that are planned for next year. Then you catch back up over time, and then there's no way around it, but when in 2039 to 2042, when you have to deal with the treatment plant, there's another need for bonding there, which should be expected based on the size of that. But this is just an overall cash flow projection to give you an idea of times when you may need to bond or look at SRF funds to cover cash flow.
What are SRF funds?
That's a loan program through the state revolving fund.
Okay.
To me, that's just another form of bonding.
Yeah. Well, you probably, as Nathan knows, we're bonded on other projects and other departments. So we're gonna have, this is really helpful as a heads up, because we just don't have unlimited bonding ability, to get everything done that we want to in the next 10 years.
And the trade-off is if you can always push the projects out further into the future, those purple bars, and bond less. Anyway, but there's things to look at there. This is just a heads up that there's, in the short term and the long term, a couple periods where you likely will need to look at bonds.
Yeah, and this is
really helpful.
This is one aspect that, having in the last week really started to whittle this down. This is an aspect that we will come back to you with much greater granular detail. So the water department, as I understand it, we can decide to pursue a revenue bond. that doesn't necessarily need customer voter approval. And the projections that they've incorporated with these rates accommodate for that. Now, depending on the interest rate, it may affect things slightly. But even if we went out to get a bond to cover some of our immediate capital needs, they aren't saying we need to increase rates when we decide that. They're accounting for those expenses anyway. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
If you got a bond, for example, over the next 4 years to cover those large purple bars in 23, 24, 25, those would turn around and some of that would become debt service over time, instead of those big capital outlays all at once.
And this is additional information that I'm looking forward to providing you. Eric's not here at the moment. Something must have come up on his computer, but we're doing 2 very detailed studies, one on filtration capacity, and that's to address this highly dynamic increase in water use during the irrigation season, as well as acknowledging that the water treatment plant needs to have these upgrades done as well. The plant's 20 plus years old, and it's time to look at those expansions. Then there's the storage tank component, which is part of our DEQ requirements as we grow. So these technical memos that they've been walking us through piece by piece are just now getting to the point where we're ready to come sit down with the council and explain them. And that will be what drives the need for a revenue bond in the next 12 to 18 months. The good thing, the only good thing probably in this thing, is that we're in a really good time to secure bonding. The federal government has released a number of infrastructure packages, and DEQ is sitting on more money than they've ever had in probably 30 years. And Eric's our expert on this. So we have a meeting scheduled with DEQ next week to learn more about that. Those loans that we get through the state revolving fund could likely come with some principal forgiveness, like a grant from those infrastructure bills.
That's great.
So it's really, we talked about this, should we raise rates so we can bond less so we don't have to pay interest? Well, that's not necessarily fair to the customers today, because those infrastructure improvements are going to serve customers way out into the future that can help cover those costs. So it's all about being equitable and fair. But even though we never like to go borrow money, this could be one of the best times in recent history to do so.
Yeah, and then you got the opportunity that could be forgiven. So
That's our goal.
Yeah.
And we need to get, I mean, they haven't even decided how they're going to do this yet, but they're telling us it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So the application period for that is December, and then the announcements would come in the spring. So that timeline works really well. We'll parallel that evaluation with the private sector, because the city's, got really terrific financial position to go out to the private sector and bond like we did for the library. So we'll look at both avenues, and we'll be back to discuss that with you.
Good.
So to wrap up here, it doesn't sound like I totally need to justify to you rate adjustments, but there are defined, definite benefits to regularly adjusting your rate so you have a stable funding. They include lower long-term costs overall. You avoid emergency projects and system reliability because you have stable funding. It's good practice. So that is the end of this presentation. Do you have other questions we can answer?
Well, let me just do kind of let me call on each council member to see if seems like we're in agreement. Our advice would be to you. The purpose tonight was to have discussion, gain input and direction from council. So let's work on that a little bit. My sense is that people are on board, all of us, but let's make sure that I'm not assuming that. Mike, let me start with you. Are you good with the recommended rate increases for the capitalization part, the buy-in, and the other part?
Yes. All makes sense to me. Appreciate
Lyle?
every thorough explanations.
yeah, I really appreciate the presentation. Thought it was excellent. I'm on board, and when we get going around, then I'll come back with two observations.
You bet. And we're gonna still come back to the block 3 thing. We want to talk about that some more. Colby?
Conceptually, yes. I think it's a fairly nominal increase on the monthly bill, but we seem to have been receiving fairly nominal increases on all of our monthly bills right now. So it's hard to think of another 5% increase on that. I guess that's my only concern on as far as the rates go, the base rate goes. I think everything else is good. But yeah, that's me and everyone got their tax assessment and scratching their head this year of how that happened. You know, it's it's a tough one. I mean, it's a small amount of money, but an increase of anything at this point in time is definitely going to draw some little bit of heat. But I mean, the logic behind it is sound. It's, you know, it's easy to show why it's needed. You know, I guess on the other side is what is truly needed. Is there anything that maybe isn't needed? And we look at the O&M and everything else continually, this upward slope. Is there any way that we can bring that slope down a little bit?
Yeah.
So before you answer that question, I think Lyle and someone else that had a really good observation. If you put it on a unit cost, I mean, our town's growing. We're getting more hookups all the time. So it's not fair to say Sabrina to go, hey, you don't get to hire any more people. Just keep installing meters, keep doing everything great. Yeah, the amount of water you're trying to run through the plants doubled. You know, I mean, we all do understand that, that part. So it might be helpful to us. It's more analysis, but if we could put it on some kind of is our O&M really going up per household, for example? It may not per household. It may be going down. We might be getting more efficient. But anyway, just.
Yeah, we can certainly work on that. I think
that would help.
That would be good to know.
Yeah, it would help us on, our discussions with the public.
There's a couple things that you have to remember in recent history. We, when we transferred the sewer to Payette Lakes and Water and Sewer District, our sewer bills that our citizens pay benefited from the efficiencies gained there, right? Which then increased O&M costs for our water department because of those shared resources on two different funds being lost. So that didn't help your water rates, but it did hopefully help your sewer rates. Secondly, this inflationary effect, cost of living effect, a number of those things is really driving a lot of our O&M increases. When we met and did budget this year, we had to do 100% increase in fuel costs. All of the parts that we buy have gone up significantly, a lot more than 5%. So those are really what's driving us right now. Now, the unfortunate thing too is public utilities and being maintained, deferred maintenance is always ongoing. And so that's a real challenge for me to really assess, are we doing enough operation and maintenance on our system to keep up with industry recommendations? And the answer is by and large, probably not, but we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. So I think our operation and maintenance costs will continue to increase, but we're trying to manage them in a way that what we can do realistically within our time frame. We've only got so many months in the year to do the maintenance. We try to do as much as we can without using contractors, but that may change over time. So I would like to get that number for you. I think that would be really helpful for me as well. And with the tracking that we have, we can start coming back with, you know, here's how many water meters we've replaced this year. Here's how many we should be doing each year. It's a constant evolution between what do you know about your system and then what are you actually capable of completing with your system. And with newer technologies, better installation techniques, a lot of things that happen, if you don't install a pipe properly from the beginning, you're not going to get the lifespan out of it. And so we don't know if those pipes that maybe were installed in the 90s and the 2000s were properly installed correctly. We know the ones that we've installed in the recent last 10 years have been. So a lot of factors play into operation and maintenance on a water system.
Could you go back to that slide? Page 20 is on our handout. It's
Like the teams.
our page 20. Yeah, it's that one that says benefits.
Oh, yeah.
That's why. I think what you're hearing is we really did listen to you, and this council has been really good about taking on hard things in every department to try to be continued reliability, lower long-term costs, being responsible, not just sitting on it politically and then 20 years from now having a huge increase. But you're also hearing it's pretty painful. And we really, I think, are trying to do, quote, the right thing. And you made a really good point about, went through all this effort and to give us the right numbers. And it would not be prudent for us to go to lowball that figure, make what I would call a political decision. But it is painful. That's what we're sharing.
I have a question, just out there one. Can we drill a well?
We can. It's an option we've looked at, and I'll provide in our technical memos. I think we've addressed a couple of those options. The groundwater resources here aren't great. That's one of the biggest impacts is if we were to, put in a commercial well, what would it do to the groundwater level? How would it impact other wells in the area?
Could it potentially be used to supplement the water treatment plant in some way, especially like in peak hours or peak months?
Yep.
When you're considering, the water treatment plant expansion or whatever, maybe.
Yep, most certainly. That's where the big question, that's where I've been asking is, if the treatment plant decision in 2040, are there some alternative options? Have a well and a storage tank as opposed to a treatment plant. So those are things I would really love to have Clear Solutions help answer because they really know a lot better. So let me take that back to them and I'll get back to you on that.
Awesome.
That's a really good question, Colby.
Yeah, really good thoughts. We should look at all of that.
I had one other just observation. My first one, I said I had two. My first one was same as Colby's. And that in part, when we look at making them such that the fixed income, 65-year-old, been here all my life, that person, I'm not 65, I'm beyond that. Not speaking. So and we are doing things and we just stay mindful of what we do to make that. We have our housing action plan, for example, to hold down housing costs if we have to raise costs somewhere else, as a council, we think about where might be an opportunity to make it living more affordable here. And so I think we have to constantly be thinking about where is an easier opportunity perhaps than the water. The $3 or $4 a month, but as you say, it's across 5 different things. Then pretty soon, it's just $10 a month here. But for somebody, that's a fair amount. But I just want to make it clear that we are looking at ways to make living here practical for different income levels. That was one. The other thing is, I'm not so sure also on that tier 3 that I think of the Sure Lodges or the Hotel McCalls, these major end users, that they ought to be the ones who pay the most. I don't think that so much. I think, I mean, they're businesses trying to make a living. They've got to have aesthetic grounds. They've got water. And I'm not sure that, putting it on them because they're the major users. Now, again, that's just a few of the users in block 3. I'm not quite so sympathetic to block 3 households that are using $168,000. But in terms of trying to recover some gain from block 3, I'm not necessarily thinking that, because I just think of those businesses also as being tremendous contributors back to the community in other ways. And their capacity to contribute is somewhat that they, have the profit margin to do that. So anyhow, just my point is, I don't think all the high-end users are necessarily our environmental target.
Correct.
Or, it's that we still want to be business friendly in certain situations. Thanks. That's my 2 points.
And I'd be interested to know from the business community, how significant is their water bill? Is that something, or is it their electric bill or their heating bill that's driving their costs up more than it could be employees, could be housing? It'd be nice to kind of hear. I mean, everybody's going to say, yeah, I don't want to raise, but when we really start whittling down to what are we trying to target? And one of the things I'm writing down is, I think we can come back to you and give, what % of the revenue that we're getting are coming from commercial users versus residents? Because is it really are we really targeting our largest revenue stream? And I think we've got the data, we can do that, so.
I think there's kind of a couple of things beyond just this discussion with, what are the bigger goals, if we look at the environmental aspect of it, and long-term sustainability of our water supply, that's more than just raising the water rate. That's going to come into play of, development standards and what we allow to happen in the community. And then I guess the other thing that you mentioned, what was it? Sandpoint that had impact?
Whitefish.
Oh, Whitefish had impact. I think that's in part another development discussion on impact fees and how, how can that come into play with this fee structure? Because I think it's this discussion that we need to keep having on the development. And I think that this would be one piece of that.
Yeah.
And see how it fits in there. But I guess for future discussions on this.
Yeah.
I'm going to call on Mike just to make sure that we haven't excluded him. Do you have any other thoughts after listening to us, Mike, that you'd like to share with us?
No, I don't have any other. No, I think it's a good discussion and I'm on board and yeah, I don't have other thoughts or concerns.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Bob.
So Nathan and Annette, have we provided meaningful input and met your goals for tonight's discussion in terms of hearing from council, or would you like, is there more are there other questions you'd like to ask us?
I don't have any, well, I guess I'm going to try to summarize what I think I've heard. You're on board with what we've proposed. You want us to go back and make sure we've got everything as accurate as we can make our assessments. You have had some discussion about, is there a way that our higher users can pay as much of their share as possible in an effort to not overly burden those that aren't using too much water. And that's something that we've talked about internally of, do you greatly increase block 3? And Keith, you helped answer this in my meeting the other day. There's so much that we can do within what we think is defensible. Could you explain that?
Sure, I think Greg threw this up on the screen. Everybody's seeing that slide there.
Yes, we did.
So let me just talk about cost of service for a minute. The American Water Works Association publishes the M1 manual. I'm actually a contributing author to that manual, in which we go through and we identify basically the industry standard for how to allocate cost associated with various peaking factors. And so from that process, you can go through and calculate what is a defensible and fair way to collect fees for water usage. What you're looking at here is the ratio of water costs to the base tier costs. So for example, in tier 1, you're paying $1.45. If you divide $1.45 by $1.45, that's 1.0. That's the ratio to tier 1. In tier 3, the ratio is $2.44 divided by $1.45. It's about 1.7. Does that make sense how that's working on the, what do we call that, the y-axis there? You see that stepping up over time. In addition to your rate structure, which is the black steps, I've taken the AWWA cost of service, and I've identified it as what I've called an envelope, because this is a little bit different for each entity that's out there. But we did this detailed analysis for you in 2018, and what we saw was that your costs are trending towards the top of that blue envelope. That's kind of the industry standard. Your particular costs are running towards the top. So the idea would be to set up your steps to kind of mirror the slope of that line. And in 2018, when we set up these tiers, we set up these steps to basically track that the slope of that line. So tier 3 is actually pretty fair relative to tier 1 in terms of how much we're increasing for each tier. So the question came up is, well, what if we want to collect more from those upper users? Well, what you can see is that at those larger quantities, you're actually trending now much lower than what that line would suggest. And so one possible idea is to add a 4th tier. And so if Greg flips the slide, I just picked 40,000 and I bumped it up to give us a similar slope in these steps to the upper part of that line. And so we could add a 4th tier at $3.65. If you wanted to, we could go out to 70,000 and we could add a 5th tier if we wanted. But that's one of the things that we could do. Increasing the 3rd tier will get us a little bit alone, will get us a little bit out of whack with the cost of service. But adding a 4th tier is definitely something that we could consider. I'll pause there for a second.
That sounds like a great idea to explore. And it, you know, you folks are the experts in this. It seemed like that would be a great thing to bring to this.
I think so too. It was what we talked about in the meeting, and I didn't know how strong the council felt. And so that was really important to hear this from you. And I think we can go back and look at that and show you that. And then also talk with Linda and make sure that's not becoming too complicated to send out the bills, which I'm sure it's not.
And that's a really interesting graph. Thanks for showing that to us, because that makes us feel a lot better that it's not arbitrary. It's very solid. And I think having a 4th tier would help address this conservation ethic that we all have on council and in this community to try to reduce the amount of water that we're using for irrigation outside.
The other question I guess I have, and I'd like to hear from Keith, is there was some discussion of, since we're getting so much of our revenue from the base rate, what if we shifted more of getting our revenue from the volume? So, and just to remind you, when you pay your water bill, a significant portion of that water bill is your base rate. Do we have that slide that shows us?
Yeah, so just to talk to that for a second, when we made these changes in 2018, we were moving from a flat rate to this tiered rate, and it was something new, and we were a little bit nervous, as a council and as consultants, we were a little bit nervous about the potential impacts to revenue. What we've seen though, from, I think Greg's going there, on the rate performance, the circular chart, we didn't see much change in that, in how water was being used in those various blocks. So I think we feel a little more confident that we have some rate stability. So I bring that up because there was a lot of reluctance at the time to push too much of the cost into volume charges away from those stable, reliable base rates. But if our goal is to do more with conservation, in addition to adding that fourth tier, we could consider, as Nathan said, shifting some of our cost. Your current cost is about, or current revenue is about 80% coming from base rates and only 20% coming from volume. If you look at typical AWWA ratios, more often that is closer to 50 to 60% from base rates and 40 to 50% from volume. So there's definitely some room that we could push the charges over. So I did just a really quick analysis, and Greg, that's still on that other PowerPoint. I did a really quick analysis on what would happen if, instead of adding the 5% across the board, go to the next slide there, Greg. On the top is what we showed in the first presentation. This is just adding 5% across the board to your monthly base rates and 5% across the board to your monthly volume rates. What happens if we hold your monthly base rates flat at that $49.61 and we put the full increase into the volume charges? If that's the case, by 2028, we would be pushing that block 3 rate up to $5.70 versus the $3. And the smaller users would be seeing a similar charge, but we would be pushing more of that cost over onto the volume rates. So that would allow us to, again, defensively collect a little more. You'll notice I didn't add block 4 here. I was not trying to incorporate all the possible options, but this is just one more idea of what we could do.
Seems like that would be really good to have that come back to us. That's really good thinking.
Yeah, and maybe even, again, to gain the confidence, we go to 70%. We're for 80, we go to 70, and in 3 more years, we want to go to 60, and we see the impact of shifting to volume. And particularly, again, back to kind of sensitive, it's probably not my normal stance to say sensitive about the business aspect, but it's just, again, make sure that the high volume users who must use a lot but in doing that, we are saying to the residential use, there's a way to say in block 4, the rate goes to this, but only if it's residential.
So you had a hand up. Is it Louise?
Louisa.
Louisa, excuse me.
Yeah, I had 2 comments that I wanted to make. The first was just to address what Keith was saying about shifting it to use more so than to a base rate. The one thing you have to be careful with is that
your average monthly user's bill doesn't increase more than you're comfortable with. I know that someone had brought that up earlier, that we don't want to squeeze out people who are being good at conserving water, because if you, I don't know, I ran the numbers on this sample that we put together where we're putting more emphasis on the usage, and that does come out to a higher monthly bill for most users despite having a lower monthly base rate. But that's something we can play around with and probably adjust to a number that we like. But I guess my question is, what's more significant? Is it more significant to I guess, promote conservation, or is it more significant to try to keep your average users increase relatively small year over year? That was my first point. I have another one, but maybe I'll just leave it there.
That's a very, very good point. I think we're trying to balance those things. We don't want to go overboard and then come back, find out we made things worse for our residential users that are, say, using, the minimal amount. They're only in block 1 and all of a sudden their bill's going way up. We don't want to do that.
And there is good argument for you to have a stable revenue stream, meaning up in the far above 50% base rate. Then you're less subject to, say, a very rainy summer where you don't sell any water and your revenue is considerably down. Conservation, in terms of rates, is a double-edged sword, and nobody likes to say it. You don't have the problem right now where people are conserving too much, but if people conserve too much, you have to raise rates just because now you're selling less water. So it's a trade-off. You always want to conserve to be good citizens, but.
So, I guess a couple of things. One, with the base rate, with this discussion or this consideration of holding it steady, that to me doesn't make sense, like like we have done in the past where it was the same rate for 15, 17 years or whatever. It seems like you would want to incorporate, maybe a 1 to 2% in that base rate, maybe a smaller increase in the base rate continually and push that increase on the usage rate potentially in order to have a stable, continued, known factor in there. And second, it'd be really interesting to see with this model here, what the average water bill might look like with the flat monthly rate going forward, if it projected out a few years.
Calculate that real quick because I was curious about it as well.
Before you answer that, Louisa, though, I just want to emphasize, I did this really quickly as just a demonstration of an alternative. We would obviously need to refine it before we get to a recommended rate.
Sure.
Yeah,
that might be helpful. Might be helpful to bring that back to us as kind of flushing that out a little bit.
Yeah.
So Louisa, you said earlier, we kind of cut you off after your first observation. You had a second observation you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, this is more a point of clarification. And I think Nathan talked about this a little bit earlier, but if the concern is to put too much pressure on businesses that are high water users, he did mention they could get a larger meter. And maybe I'm repeating something that everybody in the room already knows, but the usage, the blocks are based on usage per ERU. And so a 3/4 inch meter is 1 ERU. But if you had a larger meter, like a 2-inch meter, then that allows for more ERUs. I forget what the exact conversion is, but I think a 2-inch might be 4 ERUs. Is that correct, Nathan?
Yeah, it's 6.
6.
6, okay.
So
So that
that
means
reminds me
that
of a-
someone that has a 2-inch meter can actually use 30,000 gallons and stay within block 1. So they're not necessarily punished in the same way for being high water users if they have a larger meter size. And that's something to consider on both ends of the spectrum, both for homes that are now wanting to have larger meters because they have huge homes and large gardens that need to be irrigated. They can almost get away with using more water because they have more ERUs. But on the other hand, it does support businesses. If they have these larger meter sizes, then they can use more water in a, I would say, equitable way.
I think I'm gathering what the council's looking at. You'd like us to come back, look at considering a block 4 and what that will do. And then also adjusting the base rate percentage of revenue so that we're shifting some of it towards volume. And we will work on identifying what we think is the best balance of those two. And we got a lot, this is a perfect work session discussion. This is what staff loves to get out of this, is question and answer some specific things. But we also don't want to give you too many options so you can't make a decision. We've got a short time frame. We've got to set an upper budget limit. So the good thing is I think you're generally on board with the recommendation. We'll dovetail these two recommendations into a final recommendation that we'll bring back with you. And Linda, since you're on the screen or you're on the meeting and you had your hand up, but you took it down, help me understand our schedule. So we would need to come back when you set the budget limit. Is that right?
Yeah, so we would want to incorporate any potential rate increase when we set the upper limit of the budget on July 29th.
Okay.
And then depending on if the decision's made after that point, depending on the decision and what the rates are, then we could adjust those down. We can adjust the budget down to reflect the actual rate increase.
Okay, so we'll work hand in hand with Linda to make sure that when we come back to you, we've established maybe the highest revenue case scenario so that you can set that limit and still have time to adjust if you decide to make some change of direction. So we'll be back with you on the 29th.
It's a pretty tight schedule.
And then it says in our memo, which is really helpful that you folks put together, it says in August, the city council needs to adopt the water rate study update, which also, the rates and stuff. Okay.
Ed, one more thing. And on the data end of stuff of usage, you're really kind of curious to know how many residents or how many people are using more than 100,000 gallons a month? Or, kind of what does it look like? And I don't know if there's any way to kind of figure out what's commercial, what's residential type stuff. One thing that might be longer term would be finding out what commercial businesses, who has what size of water connection. I don't think it's going to make or break any business specifically, but if they have an opportunity to streamline their budget, might consider getting a different water connection if they're not appropriately sized.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about that. Although you gain the benefit of having more volume in block 1, you're also paying multiple times the base rate.
Yeah.
So it's not an obvious savings to go get a bigger meter. You're immediately going to get hit with 7,000 per ERU capitalization fee, one-time fee.
Yeah.
And then you're also going to have a higher base rate per month because a 1-inch meter, which is 2 ERUs, is twice the base rate. So that you really would have to do a quick spreadsheet to see where your water use is going to find the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And there's not like a silver bullet there. So That's the good thing about the way we create these so that they're fair and equitable. You can't cheat the system. But those two major modifications that you want to see an alternative with a block 4 and shifting some base rate revenue into volume is what I think we can come back with in the time frame that we have.
On that shift to some, I agree with Colby. It doesn't mean that we're gonna flat rate across 10 years. There'll still be an incremental
Yeah.
increase. It's just that what is the ideal amount?
And what we'll be doing on the back end is saying, how does this affect our average user? Because it may be disproportionate. And we want to make sure we don't recommend something that then disproportionately affects our average user just because we're trying to help place the burden on the high user.
And good observations on all of that. And I'm going to draw this to a close unless anyone has some final comments. So let me start with Greg, Keith, and Louisa. We are sure happy and really impressed with all the work that you have done ever since the beginning and forming a really healthy relationship with the city. It's paying great dividends, and thanks for a good presentation and answering all our questions. We look forward to working with you on getting this to the finish line to make those adjustments and hopefully work with you in the future to make sure we stay on track. Because it takes vigilance to, things change every couple of years. And Nathan, thanks for pulling this all together. Sabrina, are you still on the line?
I am.
Thanks for joining us and participating fully. We were really impressed with, I call it overachievement. I love that. And so keep collecting lots of data. I think it's helpful.
I love data.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Council, if there's further things you would like to say, go ahead and say them. And then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
I would just like to say one more thing on the conservation piece. I think that we need to keep moving forward and deciding what our goals as a community are, and water is a major part of that for us. And the rates are not going to be the single solution to that. And I think that we need to stay on top of those discussions and figure out how, it reflects in those graphs of the capital improvements that we have that, we saw a bunch of growth in the last couple of years. It's abnormal or, above average. Is it going to keep doing that? What does it look like? What are going to be our water system needs in the future if we have, this business as usual kind of unchecked growth, unchecked consumption of water? How can we reduce the long-term capital costs in our water system through conservation and through different development practices? I think that's the bigger conversation outside of this that I would like to keep having.
All right.
Double that thought.
Look.
Motion, we adjourn.
Thank you, Lyle.
Second.
Council, all in favor of adjourning tonight's special meeting, please say aye. Aye. All right, I don't hear any opposition to that, so we are adjourned, and thank you all. Really good discussion.